Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Well, hello, and welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. Think Thursdays are all about neuroscience and mindset and brain health and using these ideas and learning and understanding our brains better to help us create sustainable change in our lives, all about behavior change. And really, we want to talk about things in a practical way that helps you learn how to live with your beautiful, brilliant human brain and hopefully take better actions and learn how to manage it. And that's really what Think Thursdays are all about. So let me ask you something. Have you ever laid awake at night, kind of replaying a conversation in your head, wondering if you said something wrong, if you might have offended someone, or maybe you have spent hours, maybe even days, like rethinking and thinking and stewing over a decision that you made, questioning whether it was the right one? There's other examples. I guarantee you, if you are a woman, you've probably worried over and over and over again about whether you're doing something, if it's the right decision one of your children made. I shouldn't capitalize that only to women. Obviously, parents, anybody, dads, you can think that way too. It's actually been clinically proven that women tend to do this what we're talking about, which is rumination, more than men. I don't know why that's true, but that's actually been proven by researchers. And we all still do it. We all ruminate, and it's exhausting. We're going to dive into what rumination really is today, why we get stuck in it, how it really sabotages progress that we're making, and really, most importantly, how can we stop doing it, how to break free from that. Whether you're stuck staying in habits that no longer serve you, whether you're doubting your ability to change with a self-limiting belief, or if you are constantly worrying about the future and catastrophizing, rumination can hold you back from becoming who you want to be. So let's talk about it, how to let it go, and how to start moving forward. Rumination is what happens when your brain gets stuck in the loop of repetitive negative thinking. It's when you obsess over problems, mistakes, regrets without actually doing anything to solve them. And that is a key distinction right there. I often talk about being an energetic, creative problem solver. And if we are spending too much time in the problem, we aren't focused on the solution. That is a very clear sign of rumination. Dr. Susan Nolan Hoeksema, who was a leading psychologist in this field, she was a Yale researcher and an author, someone who really dedicated much of her work to this topic, described rumination as the focused attention on the symptoms of one's distress and its possible causes and consequences rather than solutions. And I think that is so important because I know as a mom, right? Sometimes I feel like when I am sitting there and I'm worrying about something, I feel like I'm being productive. I actually did a podcast episode on this on the big podcast about worry, and I will link that in the show notes. But rumination feels like you're problem solving, but it's really just mental quicksand. You are sinking deeper and deeper into the problem instead of pulling yourself out. And it might sound like, why can't I stick to this new habit? I shouldn't have said that yesterday. What if I mess this up again? This kind of thinking does not help you grow. It actually keeps you stuck. And it's a habit pattern that people get into of rumination. All right. I want you to hear me on that too. We're not just trying to break, habits like drinking alcohol or overeating, but habits in our brains and how we use them can be just as much a habit pattern. So, if you are a person that gets stuck in rumination all the time, I really want you to listen to this episode and take some new actions. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we ruminate? Our brains are literally wired to pay attention to threats. That lower brain, right? We've talked about this on the podcast many times. The prefrontal cortex, the logical, more human part of the brain, if you will, because it's the part that evolved last, and only we, beautiful, brilliant humans, have that larger prefrontal cortex. But back in the day, before all that happened, our brains were more primitive. And and we're really wired and geared towards survival. These days, we don't have those same types of survival threats in terms of imminent danger, being attacked or being, eating something that was poisonous or something that was really going to kill us rapidly. Now, most of our threats are emotional, like making mistakes or being judged. And our brains still treat those things as if they were life or death situations. We've talked about it before on the podcast. I've gone into the idea that, again, being part of the tribe was actually important way back in, uh, in those long ago years in terms of protection, right? And we still, that primitive part of the brain still relies on and sees like an emotional threat, like being judged, as being pushed out of the protective circle. And if you were isolated and alone back as in, Neanderthal days, or whatever I'm going to say the wrong, the wrong prehistoric days, but you know what I'm talking about. Way back in before we had, with all the wonderful things that we have now in this advanced world, things were much more primitive and everything was more dangerous. And if you were outcast and not a part of the general society or the tribe, you were in more danger. So nowadays we don't have that same kind of thing happening, but when we are not a part of the in crowd, our brains can perceive that as a threat. Dr. Ethan Kross, who is the author of Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters and How to Harness It, explains that our inner voice is designed to help us solve problems. But when that self-talk turns into rumination, it really becomes destructive. Your brain thinks that by replaying situations, you'll somehow gain control or prevent the problem from happening again. And I think that is key, right? We think that if we replay the situation over and over and over again, that we're going to prevent something like this from happening ever again. Which, of course, I mean, obviously we want to learn, right? From things that we've done in the past that we might say are a mistake. But when we just simply keep replaying the situation, the opposite actually happens. We get stuck in self-doubt. We create anxiety. And you've all heard analysis paralysis, right? When we cannot figure it out, that's because we are stuck in rumination. You are definitely going to have a harder time taking any actions positive actions towards changing habits that are no longer serving you if you get stuck in rumination. And here's the thing, rumination definitely impacts your mindset, but it doesn't just drain your energy. It has real consequences for your mental and physical health. Research published in the Clinical Psychological Review show that rumination is strongly linked to anxiety, depression, and chronic stress. When you are stuck in overthinking, your stress response, we just talked about chronic stress here on Think Thursday. So this is really, this again, they align very clearly. When you are stuck in overthinking, your stress response stays switched on. And that higher that means higher levels of cortisol. It means worse sleep. It means more irritability, and it means less emotional resilience. Those are the signs of chronic stress. And when you have less emotional resilience, guess what? So many people turn to coping mechanisms like, and for those people listening here, probably that would include drinking alcohol, right? Here's the kicker. Overthinking convinces you that it's safer to stay in the same place. And that is why it's so important to catch yourself in rumination, especially when you are trying to break a habit like a long-term drinking habit or anything else that you have been doing for emotional resilience, for as a coping mechanism to help you navigate emotions. If you are constantly replaying how hard it is to change a habit or how many times you failed before, this is another problem. You might start believing that change isn't possible, and you will end up staying stuck in your habits that don't align with the person that you would like to be, with who you are becoming. Here's the truth. Like I said, rumination is a habit too, and like any habit, it can be changed. Let's talk about how we can disrupt the cycle of rumination. Here are 5 science-backed strategies that you can start using today. First, this is very important. If you catch your brain using a why question, like, why do I always do this? Really stop yourself and ask yourself, how can I do this differently next time? Switch from why to how, a very simple and easy switch. Why questions keep you focused on the problem. How questions lead you to solutions. Dr. Nolan Hoeksema found that this simple shift can stop rumination in its tracks and really help you take action. So, again, moving from why to how. Number 2, engage in purposeful distraction. Now, I know many of you have thought that distraction is not a good thing because it's not long-term, it's not a solution. And I know this from many of you that I've talked to. Your brain does need something in this moment to interrupt the cycle. But this does not mean mindless scrolling or binge watching TV. I often tell people that I work with, the very first thing I want them to do when they're in this rumination cycle is to visualize a stop sign. Literally, stop. Tell yourself, stop. Big stop sign. And then I want you to pick an activity that fully engages your mind and body. Go for a brisk walk, cook something new, tackle a creative project, find something that requires your brain to pay attention. Research shows that meaningful activities help break the loop of rumination and give the brain space to reset. Number 3, practice self-compassion. Rumination thrives on self-criticism. I've said it before on the podcast. One of the things that helped me most in changing my relationship with alcohol, in changing habits that don't serve me in general, is that I simply stopped talking to myself in a way that is negative. And that is right down to the very smallest examples. You, I am sure, like me, have misplaced your car keys occasionally or maybe frequently. And I used to have a really bad habit of calling myself an idiot every time that I misplaced my car keys. And it is simply something that I will not allow myself to do anymore. When I catch myself talking to myself that way, I literally say, stop. We don't talk to ourselves like that anymore. You're human. You've lost your car keys. It's okay. Keep going. We'll find them. When you catch yourself spiraling in rumination, pause and ask yourself, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Dr. Kristen Neff, who is probably the leading researcher on self-compassion, shows that treating yourself with kindness reduces rumination and actually builds resilience. So we want to be kind and compassionate to ourselves. Even if you're frustrated with yourself for ruminating, you've got to be compassionate. Allow yourself, remind yourself, this is just the brain doing what the brain does on that lower level. I have to take the reins and remind myself how to use the higher, more logical part of my brain. And that's what I'm doing here. Offer yourself the same compassion that you would a friend. Number 4, set a time limit on problem solving. This is a really good practice. Give yourself permission to think about a problem, but set a timer on it. Set a 10 to 15 minute time limit to reflect and then turn your attention to reflecting on solutions. When the timer goes off, move on. So, give yourself maybe 5 minutes to think about the problem and then say, okay, now I am going to brainstorm solutions and turn on the timer again. When the timer goes off, literally move on. Say, okay, that's it for today. I'm on to other things. If you need to come back and do that exercise again for the very same problem, tell yourself, I'll do it again tomorrow. This keeps you from falling into an endless analysis and forces you to either take action or let it go. Number 5, the name it and tame it tool. I love this. So let's try it together right now. Take a moment and notice what's running through your mind without judging it. Let's label it. Ask yourself, is this a worry? Is it a regret? Is it self-criticism? Is it a future fear? Say it out loud or silently even to yourself. This is a worrying thought. This is a self-critical thought. That's it. Just label it. Research shows that simply labeling your thoughts, naming them, helps deactivate the emotional centers in your brain. It creates space between you and the thought, which makes it easier to observe, easier to let it go, easier to just not be tied to your own thoughts. Your thoughts are not you. You are the thinker. So we need to separate ourselves, create some distance, and we can do that by labeling thoughts as to exactly what they are without criticism. Like we're not going to be subjective about it. We're not going to say that's a bad thought. We're not going to describe it in a negative way and put judgment on it. We're simply going to label it for what it is. That is a worrisome thought. That is a regret. I have to say that I like to use I look at a thought and determine whether or not it's helpful to me. I use that terminology. That is to some degree, a judgment. But if the thought is not helpful, then I want to figure out, then I will probably take that step and figure out, okay, is this a worry, a regret? What is it? For me, like I said, I do ask myself, is this helpful? Is it useful? But back to this particular exercise, name it to tame it. Research shows that simply labeling your thoughts, naming them, helps us get free from rumination. Rumination tricks us really into believing that we're solving problems when we really are just spinning our wheels. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can shift from why to how. We can practice self-compassion. We can set limits, time limits, literally, on overthinking. And we can name our thoughts and create separation from the ruminating thoughts in that way. We can interrupt the cycle and start moving forward. This week, I really want to challenge you to catch yourself when you start to spiral. Imagine that stop sign, literally big red stop sign, and say, stop, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what kind of thought is this? Then label it. That's really where change begins. It begins with our thinking. And whether we are trying to change the habit of how we use alcohol in our lives or any other habit that doesn't serve us, it all starts with how we manage our minds. So, if you are ready to make meaningful changes in your habits, be sure to come on over to Alcohol Minimalist and Look around. You can find it at www.mollywatts.com. Come to the Facebook group. Check us out there. Remember, your change is totally possible 100%, and it starts with how you think. Choose peace. I will see you on Monday.